They called it a refuge. A place of hope, nestled among the olive fields of rural Catalonia. Santa Eulalia Orphanage was supposed to save children from poverty and sin. Instead, it became a dark sanctuary for secrets, cruelty, and a twisted brand of salvation. Between 1926 and 1951, 93 children lived, and many died, within its stone walls. Some whispered that the church took them in out of kindness. Others believed it was for something far more sinister. Whichever story you believe, only one thing is certain. The horrors that happened behind Santa Eulalia's iron gates were enough to stain an entire generation. Save us, save us. Tonight, we will walk the crumbling halls of Santa Eulalia, uncover the diaries hidden beneath rotten floorboards, and listen to testimonies too dreadful for confession. But be warned, once you hear what happened to those 93 souls, you'll never look at charity, or faith, the same way again. If stories of real historical horror keep you awake at night, subscribe and ring the bell. Because some tragedies are too dark to fade, even with time. Chapter 1. The Gates of Salvation. The iron gates of Santa Eulalia were taller than any child who passed through them, taller even than most grown men. Black and speckled with rust, they creaked open with a sound that might have belonged to the jaws of some ancient beast. Beyond them, a long gravel path wound its way up to the orphanage, flanked by gnarled olive trees that seemed to twist toward the building in silent accusation. It was early spring of 1926 when the first group of children arrived. They came in the back of a rickety cart driven by two monks, heads covered in coarse hoods. The children were thin, their clothes tattered, some with lice crawling openly across their scalps. A few clutched at each other with bony hands, whispering prayers taught by desperate mothers who had little else to offer. At the top of the path, Sister Asuncion stood waiting. Her habit was pristine, her eyes dark and hollow. She greeted each child by name, though none had introduced themselves. Some smiled shyly, mistaking her gentle voice for kindness. Others shrank from her cold, skeletal fingers as she guided them inside. The main hall was impressive in its gloom. High arched ceilings caught every sound and made it echo as if spirits whispered overhead. Religious icons stared down from every wall, painted eyes that seemed to follow the newcomers wherever they stepped. At the far end of the hall, a wooden crucifix loomed, larger than life. Christ's face was twisted not in mercy, but in something closer to despair. "Welcome to your new home," Sister Asuncion said. Her voice carried through the stone hall, making it sound almost like a chant. "Here you will be cleansed, federal taught the ways of our Lord, and saved." Saved. The word clung to the children's minds like burrs. Saved from what? From hunger? From sin? From themselves? None of them dared ask. That night, after bowls of watery broth and hard bread, the children were led to cramped dormitories. Rows of narrow beds stood beneath windows that never quite closed, so that the wind always found a way to slip inside and coil around their feet. The blankets were rough, scratchy, and smelled faintly of mildew. Some of the younger ones sobbed into their pillows. Others lay rigid, eyes wide open, watching shadows move across the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open. Slow footsteps approached, then paused, then retreated. Nobody ever saw who was there. Days at Santa Eulalia settled into a grim rhythm. Mornings began with prayer at 5 a.m., children kneeling on cold flagstones until their knees turned raw. After prayer came chores, scrubbing floors, laundering the clergy's garments, tending the overgrown gardens. Only after these tasks were complete did they receive breakfast, usually a crust of bread dipped in weak coffee. Classes were taught by Brother Mateo, a stern man whose breath always smelled faintly of copper. He carried a long wooden pointer which he tapped against his leg as he spoke of salvation and punishment, heaven and hell. If a child faltered on their catechism, the pointer would strike their knuckles. Or sometimes it broke the skin. At first, the punishments were small. A slap here, a night without supper there. But as the weeks turned into months, Santa Eulalia revealed deeper cruelties. One boy, Miguel, had a stutter that grew worse under stress. Brother Mateo decided the devil must be playing with his tongue. To cast it out, he forced the boy to keep a pebble in his mouth at all times. When Miguel choked one afternoon, Sister Asuncion simply crossed herself and whispered, "God's will." Whispers began among the children of a locked room at the end of the east wing. Its door was painted black, unlike the others. Sometimes, faint weeping could be heard from within. When children asked about it, they were told it was the penitent's chamber, where souls too stained for ordinary discipline went to be purified. At night, older children told stories of spirits that wandered the halls, tiny hands that tugged at blankets, breathy voices that begged for help. One girl claimed she woke to see a pale face above her bed, eyes weeping blood. By morning she was gone. Sister Asuncion told the others she had been called to serve God elsewhere. No one ever saw her again. Meals grew stranger too. Once, a stew was served that left 3 children violently ill. Another time, small bones were found in the bread, excused away as poor milling by the baker. Those who complained were sent to the black door. Outside, the olive trees grew thicker, almost crowding against the orphanage walls. At dusk, their twisted branches looked like clawed hands scratching to get in, or perhaps to hold the building shut, to keep its darkness contained. By the time autumn rolled around, some of the children no longer remembered their parents' faces. Santa Eulalia had become their entire world, a world of prayers and punishments, of damp stone and echoing cries, of a salvation that felt more like damnation. And above it all, the church continued to smile, accepting donations from the wealthy who believed they were rescuing the poorest souls in Catalonia. Little did they know what charity had truly bought. The children soon learned never to speak out of turn. Silence was safer. Questions were dangerous. Even laughter drew suspicious glances from Sister Asuncion, who claimed mirth was the devil's delight. Whenever a child dared to smile too brightly, she would remind them, in a voice that slithered between gentle and chilling, "God watches those who forget to mourn their sins." One morning a new boy arrived. Andres. His parents had died of typhus, and neighbors scraped together enough money to send him to Santa Eulalia. He was thin, hollow-eyed, and so frightened that he clung to the monk who brought him. Sister Asuncion greeted him with a cross drawn on his forehead. That night Andres awoke screaming. The other children saw nothing but found long scratches on his arms the next day. He tried to tell them about dark figures whispering in his ear, hands that crawled across his chest, but his voice cracked and he could only sob. Weeks later he vanished. When the children asked, Sister Asuncion calmly said he had been taken by angels. Yet behind her, Brother Mateo's knuckles were stained with something dark that wasn't quite ink. It was during a cold snap in December that the true dread of Santa Eulalia began to reveal itself. The stone walls grew slick with condensation, making the halls smell of rot and damp earth. One morning the children found dozens of dead birds scattered across the courtyard. Their bodies were twisted, beaks open as if screaming. Sister Asuncion ordered the children to gather them and toss them into a pit behind the kitchens. That night the children lay awake, imagining the sound of tiny wings beating beneath the soil. Sometimes, during the pre-dawn prayers, children would glance around and realize someone was missing. Beds would be stripped clean, belongings gone. When they asked, the nuns would only whisper that the child had been purified and sent on. But no one ever returned. No letters, no farewells. Just silence. Lucia, a girl of about 11 with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, began to keep track. She scratched names into the underside of her wooden bed frame. Miguel. Andres. Rosa. Jorge. Little by little the list grew. And with it her fear. Santa Eulalia's gardens, once a thin promise of color, turned to mud and weeds. Thorny vines crept up the walls like they were trying to choke the life from the building. Even the crucifix in the main hall seemed to change. One day a few children swore the carving of Christ's eyes were open, watching them as they filed past. At supper, Lucia often found herself staring at her reflection in the dull surface of her spoon. Her cheeks had hollowed, her hair grown brittle. The girl looking back seemed older, haunted. Sometimes she imagined the reflection smirking when she wasn't. Then in the dead of night a bell began to toll. Slowly at first, then with urgent, desperate clangs. The children huddled together in their dormitories as cloaked figures passed by their doors, whispering prayers that sounded more like incantations. From the east wing came muffled screams, abruptly cut off. Lucia gripped her rosary so tightly it left marks in her palm. The next morning, the hall smelled strongly of burning wax and iron. A long trail of dark stains led from the black door all the way to the kitchens. Sister Asuncion simply smiled at the children, her teeth tinged pink. "Some sacrifices," she said, "are required for God's favor to remain upon us." Lucia decided then that she would start writing everything down. Not just names but dates, little things she noticed. Bruises on the younger children that didn't come from play, monks carrying bundles through the courtyard at odd hours, Sister Asuncion's hands trembling when she wiped sweat from her brow. If God was truly watching, Lucia thought bitterly, then maybe he needed help seeing the truth. And as Christmas neared, a time that should have brought joy, laughter, perhaps a tiny tree adorned with scraps of ribbon, Santa Eulalia only grew colder, hungrier. The children were thinner than ever. Their prayers sounded hollow, echoing back at them from the stone walls like mocking laughter. Lucia pressed her diary to her chest each night, whispering promises to the names carved into her bed. "I won't forget you. I'll remember. Even if nobody else does." But memory, she would soon learn, was a dangerous burden in a place that thrived on forgetting. Chapter 2: Lucia's Ledger of the Damned. Lucia's diary was no longer just a diary. It had become a lifeline, the only way she could anchor herself to sanity amid the creeping madness of Santa Eulalia. Each night, beneath the moth-eaten blankets that barely staved off the cold, she would carefully unroll the little book from the hem of her nightdress. She wrote by the faint light of a stubby candle stolen from the chapel, its wax dripping dangerously close to her fingers. She documented everything. The names of the missing, the bruises on their bodies before they vanished, the chants she overheard echoing from the east wing late at night. Her handwriting grew cramped and urgent, the ink sometimes smudged by tears she didn't remember shedding. One page simply read, "I woke and thought I saw Rosa at the foot of my bed. But Rosa is gone." Her face was wrong. Hollow. Her mouth kept opening like she wanted to scream but nothing came out. Lucia began to notice the nuns avoided looking at her. They glanced past her or brushed her shoulder as though she wasn't truly there. One day in the refectory, Sister Asuncion's hand accidentally touched Lucia's as she handed her bread. The nun flinched as though burned, and Lucia caught a glimpse of something like panic in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual cold serenity. But it left Lucia trembling. She recorded that too. At night, the children sometimes heard footsteps in the dormitory halls. Heavy, deliberate. If any dared peek from under their covers, they might glimpse shadowy figures draped in robes darker than midnight, faces hidden by deep cowls. Once, Lucia thought she saw Brother Matteo carrying a bundle. It was small, wrapped in rough cloth. Something about the way he cradled it made her stomach twist. The black door at the end of the east wing became a specter in their thoughts. By day, it sat closed and silent, but at night faint moans, sometimes unmistakably childish, seeped from its cracks. Lucia made tally marks in her diary for every night she heard them. The margins of those pages grew crowded with scratches. Then came the feast of St. Eulalia. The day was supposed to be one of celebration, of bright hymns and special bread sweetened with honey. Instead, it became a day that would haunt Lucia's sleep forever. The children were woken before dawn and ordered to wash thoroughly in freezing water. They were dressed in fresh white smocks that smelled faintly of ashes. Brother Matteo led them in procession down the main hall, chanting prayers in Latin that Lucia had never heard before. The words scraped against her mind like knives, making her dizzy. They were taken into the chapel. Candles burned in the dozens, dripping black wax. The crucifix above the altar was covered in a dark cloth, as if even Christ could not bear to watch. Sister Asuncion stood by the altar, her hands clasped tight, whispering fervent prayers that seemed more frantic than holy. Then the monks brought in a wooden chest. Old, iron-banded, stained with dark marks that Lucia's stomach recognized immediately as blood. When the chest opened, the children gasped. Inside lay a child, or what had once been a child. Its skin was pale, mottled, lips blue, eyes half open in a frozen expression of terror. Tiny wounds dotted its arms and legs. Symbols had been carved into its chest, some still oozing. Sister Asunción's voice trembled as she intoned, "To cleanse the sins of this house, a soul must be offered pure and unwilling. Thus has it ever been, thus shall it ever be." Lucia felt bile rise in her throat. Around her, other children began to weep. Brother Mateo raised a blade, a thin, cruel thing that glinted red in the candlelight, and began to cut away pieces of the body, dropping them into a wide bowl held by another monk. Some children fainted. Lucia couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. Her mind felt as if it would splinter. The monks then carried the bowl through the rows of terrified children, dipping their fingers into the thick, dark mixture and daubing it onto each trembling forehead. "Blessed be the Lamb who bears your burdens," Brother Mateo whispered to Lucia as he pressed the sticky smear onto her skin. Lucia wrote later that night, her hand shaking so badly the words were almost illegible. "If God lives here, he is a monster." After that day everything changed. The children moved like ghosts, silent, hollow-eyed. Meals grew scarcer. More were taken through the black door and fewer returned. Lucia's diary bulged with scraps, bits of cloth, strands of hair she found outside the east wing, tiny tokens she clung to as proof these children had existed at all. She started seeing Rosa again. Not in dreams this time. In the courtyard, near the olive trees, Rosa would stand, head tilted strangely, mouth moving without sound. When Lucia blinked, she was gone. Once, Lucia awoke to find her bed wet, not from any childish accident but from a cold slick that smelled of iron. Her hands were stained red, though there was no wound on her. In horror, she scrubbed herself raw in the wash basin, biting back sobs so the sisters wouldn't hear. Her only comfort was that diary, her private record of evil. But she knew she could not keep it much longer. Already, Sister Asunción watched her too closely. Brother Mateo's eyes followed her like a snake sizing prey. Lucia began to hide the diary in new places each day, inside hollow bricks, beneath loose floorboards, once even tucked behind the crucifix in the chapel. In its pages she pleaded, "If someone finds this, please remember us. Please. Don't let them lie about what happened here." And so Santa Eulalia continued its slow, terrible feast on the innocent. And Lucia, desperate and afraid, began to plot a way to reveal it all, even if it meant her own life. Some nights, Lucia woke gasping, convinced hands were around her throat. In those moments she thought she could hear faint voices, not from the dormitory but from beneath the floorboards, pleading, sobbing, sometimes laughing in brittle, shattered tones. She began to dread sleep. Her dreams were filled with visions of the child on the altar, its eyes following her as if asking, "Why did you let them do this to me?" Sometimes she saw Sister Asunción without her veil, her face nothing but writhing shadows that poured down her neck like dark water. Other nights she saw Brother Mateo in the gardens, digging with his hands, and the earth squirmed with pale little limbs. Lucia tried to warn the other children. She whispered to them at night, urging them to watch, to listen, to remember. But most only stared back with vacant eyes, too beaten down by hunger and terror to even hope. Some began to avoid her, crossing themselves when she approached as if she carried a contagion. Her diary entries grew sharper, more frantic. "I think they know. Yesterday Sister Pilar caught me near the east wing. She smiled at me but it was wrong, too many teeth, lips stretching too far. When I walked away I felt something trickle down my back. I checked later, a thin line of blood. No wound. I don't understand." Rosa stood by my bed again. This time she spoke. Her voice sounded like stones breaking. She said, "They're hungry. They'll never stop. Run." But where would I go? Winter deepened. Frost crept across the inside of the windows each morning, tiny crystalline veins like spiderwebs. The children's breaths fogged the air in the dormitories. Their skin cracked and bled from the cold. Yet Sister Asunción insisted they wake even earlier to kneel in prayer, saying their suffering was a precious offering. Then one bitter dawn, Lucia awoke to find her diary missing. Panic gripped her so hard she nearly vomited. She tore through her bedclothes, searched beneath the straw mattress, clawed at the wooden frame until splinters dug beneath her nails. Nothing. Her heart pounded so violently she feared it might stop altogether. At supper, Sister Asuncion's eyes found her across the hall. A tiny, satisfied tilt of the nun's head was all it took to confirm Lucia's terror. The diary was gone. Worse, it was in their hands now. Every secret, every name, every sin she had recorded, thinking it would be her weapon. That night, Lucia lay awake, expecting the door to burst open, monks to drag her to the east wing. Her thoughts twisted into a feverish prayer not to God, she was done with God, but to Rosa, to Andres, to all the children who had vanished. Help me. Please, if you can still hear me, protect me. Hours crawled by. At some point, she slipped into a shallow, broken sleep. She awoke to find someone standing at the foot of her bed. A small hand rested on her ankle. Lucia tried to scream, but her voice stuck in her throat. The figure leaned forward, pale face framed by matted dark hair. It was Rosa. Her mouth opened and closed, leaking thin streams of black fluid. Rosa's cracked lips whispered, so soft Lucia had to strain to hear. They're coming for you at dawn. You must go. Lucia squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them again, Rosa was gone, but a smear of that dark fluid stained the blanket where she had stood. At first light, Lucia rose quietly. She dressed in her thinnest garments, hoping she could slip past unnoticed. Her heart thundered as she crept through the dormitory, down the hall, past the crucifix whose painted eyes seemed to weep. She had no real plan, only the raw instinct to flee, to put distance between herself and Santa Eulalia before the sun rose high enough for the sisters to notice her empty bed. As she reached the back stairwell, she heard footsteps. Panic seized her, rooting her to the spot. A monk rounded the corner, face hidden beneath his hood. He paused, head tilting slowly as if scenting her fear. Then, impossibly, he turned and walked on. Lucia bolted. Down the steps, through the kitchens, out into the frost-hardened gardens. Her breath burst in white clouds. Somewhere behind her, a bell began to toll. She didn't look back. Chapter 3, Beyond the Olive Grove. Lucia ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt carved from splintered wood. Behind her, Santa Eulalia loomed against the gray morning sky, its crooked towers like skeletal fingers clutching at the light. The bell tolled again, slower now, heavier. A sound that carried through the olive fields for miles. She stumbled through rows of twisted trees, thorns catching her sleeves, biting into her skin. The cold barely touched her. Terror was a furnace inside her chest, scorching every thought except run. Somewhere in that labyrinth of gnarled branches, Lucia fell to her knees and vomited bile. Her hands clawed at the frozen ground until dirt packed beneath her fingernails. Only then did she dare to look back. Through gaps in the olive leaves, she saw figures pouring out of Santa Eulalia's gates. Monks and nuns fanned across the fields, black habits fluttering. Some carried lanterns that cast sickly orange halos. Others dragged long poles tipped with hooks. Searching. Always searching. Lucia pressed herself low and crawled deeper into the grove. The trees seemed to bend protectively around her. Or maybe it was just her feverish mind. At this point she no longer cared. Anything to stay hidden. Hours passed. The sun clawed its way over the hills, bringing little warmth. Lucia's breath came in shallow, painful rasps. At last, convinced she'd outdistanced the searchers, she allowed herself to sit beneath a thick-barked olive and rest. That was when she noticed it. The ground here was different. Loose. Freshly turned. Lucia's heart stuttered. She reached out, pushing aside tufts of grass. Beneath them, the earth crumbled too easily. A sick, familiar smell rose up, coppery, sweet, and unmistakably wrong. She clawed at the soil with trembling hands. Only an inch down, her fingers snagged on fabric. White stained dark. She pulled, and a tiny arm flopped out, skin bluish, fingers twisted into claws. Lucia recoiled, while rising in her throat. But something made her lean closer. Etched into the dead child's wrist was a symbol, the same shape Sister Asuncion had traced over the boy on the altar. Lucia fell back, choking on sobs. How many graves lay here, hidden by the grove? Dozens? Hundreds? She staggered to her feet, reeling, and ran. Ran until the olive trees thinned and an old stone wall rose before her. Beyond it lay a dirt road, empty except for a distant wagon. Her heart soared. If she could reach it, she might find someone, anyone, who didn't wear the cloth of Santa Eulalia. She clambered over the wall, tearing her dress on the stones. The moment her feet hit the road, she nearly collapsed from relief. Each step away from the orphanage felt like claws being drawn from her back. She began to sob, great heaving wails she hadn't dared voice inside those walls. Then a hand settled on her shoulder. Lucia shrieked and spun, fists raised. Before her stood a man in simple traveling clothes. A farmer, perhaps, with sun-browned skin and kind eyes gone wide at her terror. "Child? Dios mío, are you all right?" he gasped. Lucia tried to speak but could only cry. She grabbed his arm, shaking so violently her teeth rattled. Finally, words tumbled out in a hoarse rush. "Santa Eulalia, you must help. The children, they're killing us." The farmer paled. He glanced over her shoulder at the grove. "Santa Eulalia? Madre de Dios, you came from there?" "Yes. Please take me away. We have to tell someone." But his face twisted, not in compassion but in horror. He stepped back, shaking his head. "No. I can't. I won't. The church owns this land, Nina. They say to stay clear. Bad luck. Always has been." He wrenched free of her grip, stumbling to his cart. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then he lashed his mule and fled, the wheels bouncing wildly down the rutted path, leaving Lucia alone in a swirl of dust. Night was creeping in again. The cold returned, cruel and sharp. Lucia sank to her knees in the road, sobbing into her hands. Above her, the olive grove seemed to watch with dark, silent eyes. When she finally rose, there was nowhere to go but forward. She followed the road until it forked, choosing the branch that curved away from the orphanage. Her legs moved numbly, driven by sheer instinct. She didn't notice the lanterns at first. Just soft glows weaving between the trees. But then the chanting reached her ears, low and rhythmic, swelling with dreadful familiarity. Lucia froze. "Monks. Sisters." Dozens of them, spreading through the grove like a black tide. They bore icons, swinging censers that bled acrid smoke. At their head was Sister Asuncion, her face serene and luminous in the lantern light. Lucia's breath seized. She turned to run, straight into Brother Mateo. His hands closed around her shoulders with a gentleness that made bile rise in her throat. "Little dove," he murmured. "We were so worried. You strayed so far from God's grace." Lucia struggled, but his grip tightened. More hands joined his. Cold, hard fingers wrapped around her arms, her neck, her waist. She was lifted off her feet and carried back toward the grove. Her screams broke against the night air, swallowed by the trees. They brought her to a clearing she hadn't seen before. In its center stood a crude stone altar, dark with old stains. Around it, shallow pits gaped open, each lined with small familiar shapes. Children, some fresh, others little more than bundles of rags and bones. Sister Asuncion approached, her hands clasped over her heart. "You should not have tried to flee, Lucia. You were chosen." "Chosen for what?" Lucia sobbed, struggling in the monk's iron grips. "To carry our sins," Sister Asuncion whispered, her voice trembling with rapture. "To keep Santa Eulalia pure, we must offer the purest among us." Brother Mateo drew a knife, not the thin ritual blade from before, but a heavy, brutal thing. Lucia thrashed, her nails scoring bloody lines down the monk's arms, but they only grunted, tightening their hold. The blade hovered over her chest, cold breath brushing her skin. Then, a scream. Not hers. From the edge of the clearing. Everyone turned as a small figure burst from the trees. Rosa. Or what was left of her. Her skin was pallid, her eyes sunk in pits. Black tears streaked her cheeks. She rushed at Sister Asuncion, mouth open in a silent wail. Chaos exploded. The lanterns flickered wildly. Figures darted in every direction. Rosa fell upon Sister Asuncion, hands clawing, ripping. The nun's screams cut through the clearing high and thin. In the confusion, Lucia tore free. She ran blindly, branches whipping her face, rocks tearing her feet. Behind her, the chanting broke into panicked cries. Then silence. Lucia stumbled into another part of the grove and collapsed, gasping. For a long time she lay there waiting for hands to seize her again. But none came. Finally, trembling, she pushed herself up. The moon broke through the clouds, silver light spilling over countless shallow mounds around her. Graves. All around. Santa Eulalia was a garden not of olives but of bones. Lucia sank to her knees weeping. Through her tears she whispered to the dark earth. I remember you. I swear. They will never bury your names. Somewhere far off, a bell began to toll once more. Lucia didn't know how long she sat there among the graves. Her tears had dried to sticky tracks on her cheeks. The moon slid behind a veil of clouds, plunging the grove into near blackness. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted, a lonely, hollow sound that seemed to mock her isolation. She tried to stand but her legs buckled, so she crawled instead, moving from mound to mound, tracing small crosses into the dirt with trembling fingers. Each mark was a promise. A desperate oath that someone would remember these children, even if she was the last. Then she heard it. Soft footsteps crunching over dead leaves. Not hurried, not clumsy, deliberate. Come. Lucia spun around. Figures emerged from the gloom, lanterns bobbing in their hands. Faces she knew too well. Sister Asuncion, her wimple torn and streaked with something dark. Brother Mateo, his eyes glittering with that familiar feverish light. Other monks and sisters formed a silent semicircle around her, blocking every possible escape. Sister Asuncion stepped forward. Her mouth twitched into something like a smile, but her eyes were empty pits. Lucia. Little flame. You cannot outrun God's work. Lucia opened her mouth to scream, to curse them, to pray, she didn't know which. But before any sound could emerge, Brother Mateo lunged. His hands clamped around her throat, squeezing with relentless force. Spots burst before her eyes. Her limbs flailed weakly. Behind him, Sister Asuncion began to murmur in Latin, her voice a rattling chant. Lucia's world narrowed to the crushing agony in her neck, the taste of blood on her tongue. The last thing she saw was the twisted branches above, clawing at the sky as if begging it to intervene. When Lucia awoke, she was lying on cold stone. Her head pounded. Each breath scraped her lungs like glass. Slowly she realized she was back inside Santa Eulalia. The ceiling above was familiar, dark arches stained with candle soot. Nearby, a candle guttered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. She tried to move but found leather straps binding her wrists and ankles. Panic surged. She pulled until her skin burned, the restraints biting deep. A rustle. Sister Asuncion leaned over her, humming a soft lullaby. Her hands were slick with something warm. Lucia's gaze dropped and her stomach turned. The nun was cradling a bundle wrapped in bloody linen. Sister Asuncion's lips moved in tender prayer as she laid it atop Lucia's chest. Through the soaked cloth, Lucia felt the unmistakable weight of tiny limbs, still and limp. Your sacrifice has brought Santa Eulalia renewed grace, Sister Asuncion whispered, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. Your pain nourishes us all. Lucia tried to scream, tried to thrash. But something heavy pinned her down from within, a crushing, icy paralysis that wrapped around her heart. Brother Mateo stepped into view, holding a slender iron rod heated to a dull red glow. His breath came in ecstatic gasps. Without a word, he pressed the brand to the skin above Lucia's breast. The pain exploded, so vast and consuming it was almost a sound, a brilliant shriek that swallowed her mind. Darkness rushed in, roaring like a black ocean. Lucia sank into it, clutching a single, tattered thought. Remember us. Please. Someone, remember us. And somewhere deep in the bowels of Santa Eulalia, the walls seemed to sigh, as if sated for now. Outside, the olive grove shivered under the moon, roots digging ever deeper into rich, dark soil that had tasted far too much blood. Chapter 4. The Return to Santa Eulalia. Catalonia, 1973. A hot, restless wind swept through the olive groves surrounding the husk of Santa Eulalia. The once grand orphanage was little more than a skeleton of stone now, windows gaping like toothless mouths, doors hanging from rusted hinges. Vines choked the walls, creeping through cracks. Their roots burrowed deep into the foundation as if trying to pull the whole place back into the earth. Most locals refused to come anywhere near it. Farmers warned their children not to play in the groves. Even the priests in nearby villages avoided speaking its name. Only old men at taverns, well into their third glass of wine, dared whisper about the horrors said to have happened there. About the children. About the monks and nuns who simply vanished one season, leaving behind only dark stains and broken rosaries. But curiosity is a stubborn weed. And so it was that 3 university students, Javier, Marta and Luis, came to Santa Eulalia one brittle autumn afternoon, their cameras and notepads ready, eager to chase ghost stories for a thesis on local folklore. They climbed over the collapsed gate and stood in the courtyard, staring up at the looming facade. Shattered tiles littered the ground. The crucifix above the main entrance was blackened by fire, Christ's face so eroded by time it was impossible to tell if he was weeping or laughing. "Creepy as hell," Luis muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. "That's the point," Marta said, though her voice quavered. "We document the folklore, take some photos and get out." They pushed through the heavy doors, which groaned on their hinges as if resenting the intrusion. Inside, dust lay thick as velvet. Sunlight sliced through cracks and broken stained glass, painting fractured rainbows on the filthy floor. As they explored, they found remnants of life, a child's shoe half buried in rubble, a rosary dangling from a nail, rotted hymnals scattered like autumn leaves. The air was heavy with mildew and something sharper, a scent like old copper. In the main hall, Marta paused by a wall where faint scratches marred the stone. She ran her fingers over them, frowning. "What is it?" Javier asked. "These look like tally marks," she said slowly. "Hundreds of them, some deep and angry, others faint as whispers." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They moved on, winding through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, though the building itself was not large. Time warped inside Santa Eulalia. Minutes felt like hours. More than once they found themselves back where they started without knowing how. Then, in a small dormitory with decaying beds, Marta knelt by something jutting from beneath a broken frame. She tugged, dislodging a bundle wrapped in rotted linen. Inside was a thin leather book. Its cover was cracked, pages swollen and brittle. When Marta opened it, delicate handwriting bloomed across the paper, faded but still legible in places. Luis read aloud. "They took Rosa tonight. I heard her screaming behind the black door. Sister Asuncion says God is pleased with us, but I see his eyes in the crucifix, and they look afraid." A chill rippled through the room. Marta flipped through more pages, finding sketches of the orphanage, names written over and over, sometimes crossed out violently. In the margins, desperate pleas. "If someone finds this, remember us. Please don't let them lie." They spent hours poring over the diary, piecing together the tragic tapestry of Lucia's last months. Marta's hands shook as she held the fragile book, tears slipping down her cheeks. She was just a kid. She tried to keep them alive, at least in memory. Luis swallowed hard. "We have to take this back. Publish it. People should know." Javier nodded, though he kept glancing over his shoulder into the dark hall. "Let's finish photographing the chapel and get out of here. I don't want to be here after dark." The chapel was worse than the rest of the building. Black scorch marks crawled up the walls. The altar was cracked clean through. A long smear stained the floor before it as if something had been dragged. A heavy silence pressed on them, thick enough to choke. Luis took photos while Marta moved to the pulpit. Her foot struck something that clinked. She bent down and picked up a small iron brand, its tip rusted but unmistakably shaped like a twisted cross. Suddenly the temperature plummeted. Their breaths fogged the air. Then, faintly they heard it, children's voices rising in fractured song. A hymn, but wrong, the melody warped, the words a slurry of sobs and laughter. The students froze. The song grew louder, closer, as if dozens of little feet shuffled just beyond the doorway. Marta's hand tightened on the diary. "We have to leave. Now." They fled, boots echoing in the hall, the chanting chasing them. As they burst into the courtyard, the air snapped warm again. The voices cut off. Only the rustle of olive branches remained, whispering secrets to a wind that smelled faintly of rot. They didn't stop until they reached their car parked down the lane. Once inside, Marta clutched Lucia's diary to her chest. None of them spoke on the drive back to the village. 2 months later, an article appeared in a small Catalonian historical journal. It recounted the story of Santa Eulalia based on Lucia's diary, naming the children, outlining the rituals, showing photographs of the marks on the walls. It caused a brief stir, enough that tourists began daring to approach the ruin again. Some said they heard weeping in the olive groves at night. Others claimed they woke to find small handprints on their car windows, though no children were ever near. But Lucia's plea did not go unanswered. Somewhere in that tangled graveyard of roots and bones, the spirits of Santa Eulalia stirred. No longer entirely forgotten, they began to whisper their names to the wind, to laugh softly among the branches. And though the olive trees still drank deeply of old blood, their leaves seemed to rustle with a gentler promise, that memory at last had pierced the veil of silence. For the first time in decades, the orphanage was not just a mausoleum of horror. It was also a monument to testimony. To a little girl who, even in the clutches of unspeakable darkness, chose to write. And so Santa Eulalia waits, its halls echoing not only with cries of anguish, but with a single fragile hope. Remember us, please. Someone, remember us. Not long after the article was published, strange reports began to swirl through the nearby villages. Travelers claimed to have seen children playing among the olive trees at dusk. Children in old-fashioned smocks, their laughter brittle and echoing. When called to, they would turn as one, faces pale and hollow-eyed, before dissolving into the gloom. A local priest, curious and burdened by guilt from half-whispered stories passed down through older clergy, decided to conduct a mass on the grounds. He arrived with 2 altar boys and a brass censer, hoping to bless the land, to finally lay restless souls to peace. They never finished the rite. The priest stumbled from Santa Eulalia hours later, alone, eyes wild, robes torn and stained dark. He babbled about children standing in rows, mouths sewn shut, holding out their hands in silent greeting. He was found dead in his rectory days later, his hands scrawled with hundreds of tiny crosses carved by his own blade. Meanwhile, Marta, Luis, and Javier tried to move on with their lives. They graduated, published their thesis, and found modest work in Barcelona. But the shadows of Santa Eulalia clung to them. Luis began to sleepwalk, often waking with dirt under his nails and the scent of olives in his hair. Marta heard soft tapping on her window at night, even from her third-floor flat. Once she awoke to find Lucia's diary open on her chest, though she swore she had locked it in a drawer. Javier fared worst of all. He was found in his apartment one rainy morning, surrounded by hundreds of tally marks gouged into the walls, floor, even his own arms. Over and over, he had scratched the same words into the plaster. Remember them. Remember them. Remember them. Back in Santa Eulalia, nature began reclaiming the orphanage in earnest. The roof caved in, roots forced stones apart. Animals avoided the grove, birds would not nest there. Yet at night, faint lights sometimes danced through the windows, lanterns carried by shapes too small to be monks, too quiet to be living. Locals who ventured close reported hearing singing, delicate voices weaving old hymns, always ending on the same soft refrain. Salva me, salva nos. Save me, save us. And somewhere in the tangle of ruin and rot, Lucia's small voice still whispered through the leaves. Her diary, carefully preserved by Marta, though it brought her no peace, had carried their story into the world. The curse of Santa Eulalia was no longer buried. Memory is a blade two-edged. It can wound but also protect. For as long as their names were spoken, the children of Santa Eulalia were not wholly lost. The soil might still drink deep of old sins, but above it something fragile endured. A promise, a warning. And sometimes, in the hush before dawn, if the wind was right, you could almost hear them laughing. Not with joy, but with the soft, hollow laughter of souls who know they will never be entirely free. Chapter 5. The Hunger That Still Waits. Catalonia, 2019. The village had long since given up warning strangers about Santa Eulalia. It was easier to let fools wander in and never come out than to stir old memories best left buried. But the internet had changed everything. Thrill seekers, ghost hunters and so-called urban explorers now flocked to abandoned asylums and orphanages like moths to flame. Santa Eulalia was no exception. On a gray November afternoon, a black SUV pulled up on the dirt road beyond the olive grove. Out spilled 4 eager figures, laughter and cigarette smoke trailing behind them. "Jesus, it's uglier than in the photos," scoffed Marco, a thin man with a dark goatee who fancied himself the leader. He hoisted his DSLR and began snapping shots of the vine-choked facade. Carla, platinum hair tucked under a beanie, unpacked an EMF reader and handheld camera. "You heard what that old woman said back at the bar? That children still cry here at night. If we catch audio of that, this'll get 1 million views easy." Andres, who handled their sound equipment, laughed nervously. "Or it's just wind. Rats. Whatever. Let's not hype ourselves up too much." Only Lena, the youngest, seemed uneasy. She lingered by the car, eyes fixed on the twisted olive trees. "It's weird here. Like they're listening." Carla rolled her eyes. "Relax, Nina. Trees don't listen." They breached the rusted gates, stepping over debris and bones of old furniture. Inside, the air was damp and sharp, heavy with mold and something coppery that never quite faded. Their boots scuffed across the hall where Lucia once prayed for mercy. Marco's flashlight flickered over tally marks on the walls, strange symbols carved by desperate hands. Carla squealed in delight. Perfect B-roll. They ventured deeper, their equipment picking up odd static. Every so often, the EMF reader would spike violently, though no wires ran through these ruins. Lena shivered and stayed close to Andres, clutching his sleeve. In what remained of the chapel, they found the altar, cracked, dark stains radiating outward. Candles long turned to lumps littered the floor. Marco climbed up and posed dramatically. "Welcome to Mass, my flock," he jeered, arms spread wide. Then his voice deepened in mockery. "Today we sacrifice your dignity for more subs." Lena flinched. The others laughed. That was when the chanting started. At first it was faint, a low hum, almost like wind moaning through broken stone. But it grew, rising to distinct words. Latin laced with pain, swelling to fill the hall. The air turned cold enough to frost Marco's breath. Carla's camera whirred. "Holy shit, we're getting this. This is gold." Then came the footsteps. Tiny, shuffling, echoing across old flagstones. Lena clutched Andres. "That's not wind. That's not wind." Figures appeared in the darkened aisles, small, stooped silhouettes, dozens of them. Children. Or what might have once been children. Their heads lolled at odd angles. Some dragged limbs as though half broken. Empty eye sockets wept dark streams. As they approached, the smell hit, rot so ripe it gagged them. Marco stumbled backward off the altar, dropping his camera. It shattered, plastic and glass skittering. The chanting rose to a fever pitch. Suddenly, a girl stepped from their ranks. Her hair was tangled around her face, skin pale and cracked like old porcelain. Her eyes were dark holes, but tears still streaked her cheeks. She pointed at Lena. "Remember us," the girl rasped, voice splitting on every syllable. "Carry us out." Then the children surged forward. Chaos exploded. Carla shrieked, spinning to run, only to trip over a broken pew. The children were on her instantly, clawing with tiny, icy fingers. She thrashed, but her screams turned to wet gargles as small hands forced her mouth open, something dark and writhing pouring down her throat. Andres tried to pull Lena away, but a boy no older than 7 latched onto his leg, mouth stretching impossibly wide. When Andres kicked him, the child's jaw tore loose, but he kept coming, crawling up Andres' body, teeth sinking into his shoulder. Blood fountained. Andres dropped, convulsing. Marco bolted down a side corridor, panting. Fuck this, fuck this." His flashlight beam jerked wildly over walls, catching flashes of tally marks, then words smeared in something brownish red. "Salvanos. Salvanos." A little girl stood ahead, blocking the hall. Her neck was twisted fully around, yet her hollow eyes fixed on Marco. With a grotesque crack, her head snapped back to front, mouth opening in a grin that split her cheeks. Marco backed away, slipping on old blood, and fell. The last thing he saw was dozens of small gray hands reaching for him, dragging him into the dark. Back in the chapel, Lena stood frozen. The girl who had spoken, Lucia, moved closer. Her ruined face almost tender, she pressed a cold hand to Lena's cheek. "Please, remember us." The children surrounded her then, hands brushing her arms, her hair, gentle as moth wings. Lena gasped. Images flooded her mind. Lucia's diary, Rosa being dragged through the black door, the altar soaked in blood, Sister Asuncion weeping as she branded a terrified child. Lena sobbed, clutching her head, overloaded with centuries of pain. When it ended, she collapsed to her knees. The children were gone. The chapel stood empty and silent, sunlight spilling through a shattered window. Outside, Lena stumbled into the courtyard. Her friends were nowhere to be seen, only blood trails leading back inside. She didn't look. Couldn't. She walked in a daze to the olive grove. As she passed the trees, she whispered the names that filled her mind, voice cracking. Lucia, Rosa, Miguel, Andres, all of you. The branches above seemed to sigh, leaves rustling like soft applause. A faint giggle drifted through the grove, not mocking this time but almost relieved. Lena reached her car. Her hands shook so violently she dropped the keys twice. Finally the engine roared to life. She drove away, tears blurring her vision, whispering the litany of names over and over so she would never forget. Years later, Lena published a slim volume, the 93 Testimonies from Santa Eulalia. It contained fragments of Lucia's diary woven with Lena's own haunted recollections. Many dismissed it as Gothic fiction. But those who read it sometimes found small handprints on their window panes in the morning. A few even claimed to dream of olive groves whispering in voices like children. Santa Eulalia still stands, hollow and ravenous. Those who dare cross its threshold find tally marks waiting for them on the walls, new and fresh. And sometimes, if they stay long enough, they hear a chorus of small voices pleading from the shadows. Remember us, feed us, or become one of us. Because Santa Eulalia is not just a place. It is hunger. It is memory twisted to a curse. And it always finds more to swallow. Epilogue, the Whispering Earth. The olive grove stands much as it always has, its twisted branches clawing at a sky that never seems quite bright enough here. Roots snake down through the dark soil, wrapping ever tighter around bones whose names have long since faded from memory. In the hush before dawn, the land itself seems to breathe, a slow, mournful sigh that stirs the leaves into delicate, conspiratorial dances. Sometimes travelers on the distant road pause, catching glimpses of small figures flitting between the trees. A fragile laugh cuts through the air, bright as broken glass. They strain to see, heart stuttering. But by the time their eyes adjust, there is nothing. Only the restless rustle of leaves whispering secrets they can't quite understand. Santa Eulalia is more ruin now than building. Its walls are cracked and buckled under the weight of ivy and years. Doorways sag open like tired mouths. Within, the corridors are choked with rubble and bird nests, scraps of tattered fabric, and the occasional rosary dangling from a nail, forgotten offerings to a mercy that never lived here. On certain walls, new tally marks appear. Shallow scratches gouged into old stone, the dust still fresh. No hand is ever seen making them. And always there is that faint scent of iron. A ghost of blood that the decades cannot wash away. Years after Lena's slim book had fallen into obscurity, a child wandered away from a nearby village. Drawn by some whisper he could not name, he slipped through the broken gate, small feet kicking up little clouds of dust. In his hands he carried a wooden toy, its paint worn thin by generations. He explored from room to room, delighting in the echo of his own footsteps. Sometimes he giggled, and the giggles bounced back at him, doubled, trebled, until it sounded like a crowd laughing with him. When he grew tired, he curled up beneath a shattered window with his toy clutched to his chest. Outside the sun dipped low. Shadows grew long and thin, reaching through the window like careful fingers. The grove beyond began to shiver. By the time his frantic parents found him, the boy was fast asleep, a serene smile on his lips. But later that night, when his mother pulled back his shirt to bathe him, she found tiny smudges across his chest and shoulders. Marks like fingerprints, dark and slightly sticky, though she could not imagine from what. Old men at the taverns say the children of Santa Eulalia have grown lonely in their graves. That they reach up now not only for remembrance, but for company, new friends to dance among the olives, to join in their hollow songs. Others, speaking more cautiously, suggest that the land itself learned to feed. That every desperate plea carved into stone, every whispered prayer for deliverance, soaked deep into the ground until the earth grew hungry on its own. So Santa Eulalia waits, patient, eternal, listening for careless feet, for the hopeful flutter of a heart that still believes it is safe. In certain seasons, when the moon hangs low and yellow above the grove, villagers wake to find small prints in the dust outside their doors. Once, a farmer discovered his olive trees bent strangely toward the village, as if stretching out greedy arms. Another time, a widow awoke to the scent of burning wax and iron, her room full of cold, drifting voices that begged her to stay, stay, stay. And sometimes in the dark hush before dawn, the wind carries more than the smell of olives and dust. It carries voices, faint, cracked, impossibly young. Voices that still plead in a tongue older than their bones. Salva nos. Salva nos. A prayer. A warning. An invitation. So perhaps the story never truly ends. It simply coils tighter around those who dare to listen. The horror of Santa Eulalia is not confined to its crumbling stones or the roots that drink so deeply of old sins. It lives in the mouths that speak its name. In the eyes that search too hungrily for hidden truths. In the fragile chambers of memory which refuse to go silent. If you ever find yourself on that lonely Catalonian road with dusk bleeding across the sky and the grove beckoning, remember this. Remember Lucia, who tried to carry so many souls in her small hands. Remember Rosa, who still weeps in shadows. Remember the 93 who were never saved. Above all, remember that some stories do not die. They wait. And they whisper. So when the wind sighs through the olive trees and you hear faint laughter, do not follow it. Do not answer when it calls your name. And if you hear a chorus of voices, thin, sweet, impossibly sad, chanting Salva nos, walk away. Because the hunger of Santa Eulalia is patient. And it is always, always listening. Chapter hidden in the walls. They say the walls of Santa Eulalia hold more than damp and rot. They say if you press your ear to the cracked stone long enough, you'll hear voices. Not echoes. Not drafts. But whispers, telling stories the living were never meant to know. From Lucia's torn pages, found decades later, near the altar, wrapped in an old child's shawl. Tonight they said I am chosen again. They made me kneel while they traced the sign on my forehead. I bit my tongue so I wouldn't scream, so Rosa wouldn't hear me from wherever they keep her. My mouth fills with blood. I swallow it. Better mine than someone else's. I dreamed I was running through the olive trees, my feet sinking into something soft. When I looked down, the earth was full of small hands reaching up to pull me under. God does not live here. I think he tried once, but this place chewed him up too. The land speaks. I remember every foot that has stepped upon me. Tiny feet, blistered and cold. The heavy boots of men who lied in his name. The shuffle of mothers who wept at my gates, thinking this place a mercy. I remember Lucia. Her prayers burrowed deep into my soil, sweeter than any hymn. She begged to save the others. I drank her voice. I keep it still, nestled among roots and bone. You think me cruel? You feed me with your own fear. Each heartbeat that quickens in my halls is a tender morsel. Each gasp a draught of warm milk. I am patient. I am endless. I have feasted on saints and monsters alike and found them both equally sweet. A fragment of ritual, winter of 1927, glimpsed as if through a torn veil of time. They stand in a circle around the altar, candles sputtering, shadows twisting like living things. Sister Asunción's hands tremble as she holds the infant above the bowl, whispering words that burn the air. The monks chant, their voices low and hungry. A blade flashes. The child does not even cry, only gurgles, small hands flailing once before falling still. Blood splashes onto the stone, steaming in the cold. Brother Mateo dips his fingers in and marks each forehead, whispering, "Accept this gift, O merciful void. Bind your grace to us, your humble vessels." Outside, the olive trees groan, their trunks cracking. Something old and waiting shifts deeper beneath the earth. Testimonies found scrawled on walls in 3 separate rooms, each dated years apart. 1954, I was sent here to scrub floors. They told me the children's cries were just nightmares. Now I see them in the hall, eyes black, mouth sewn shut. I will not sleep tonight. 1978. We dared each other to come at midnight. Javi disappeared. I waited by the gate. He never came out. When I woke the next day, there were small handprints on my jacket. 1999. I thought it was abandoned. I went in with my camera. Found a little girl holding a rosary. She smiled. Her teeth were all wrong. When I ran, I left half my mind behind. If you read this, leave. Please. The land speaks again. Do you hear them? Even now they whisper. Names upon names, soft as the breath of earthworms. Lucia, Rosa, Miguel, Andres. Each one a root beneath your feet. Each one a mouth opening, opening, opening. They are not lost. They are part of me now, woven through my veins. If you stand here long enough, I will teach you their sorrow. I will teach you their hunger. And then you too will wait, beneath olive branches that sway even when there is no wind, hoping someone else will wander close so you might reach out and touch them with trembling hands. When the wind sweeps through Santa Eulalia, it carries more than dust and the sharp scent of old iron. Carries giggles that break into sobs. It carries prayers that end in laughter. It carries the taste of secrets pressed between blood and stone. And always, always, it carries the same plea forever unanswered. Salva nos. Salva nos.